The dust-laden wind cut across the desolate plains, carrying with it the sound of muffled sobs as Victoria Davidson clutched her battered valise on the edge of Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming. The year was 1876, and at 23 years old, Victoria had just endured the ultimate humiliation, being returned to her family like damaged goods after 3 years of marriage, all because her womb remained empty despite desperate prayers and folk remedies. "Your daughter's barren," Malcolm Spencer had told her father coldly that morning before riding away without a backward glance. "I need sons to work my land, not a useless wife." Victoria's family had stood silent, ashamed. Her father, a hard-drinking man with 6 other mouths to feed, had simply shaken his head and muttered, "You can't stay here, girl. We barely got enough as it is." So here she stood, at the crossroads outside of town, with nothing but $20 sewn into her petticoat and a letter of introduction to a distant cousin in Colorado who might or might not take her in as household help. The afternoon stage had already gone, and the next wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. The small depot was locked up tight, leaving her nowhere to shelter for the night. A rumble of thunder rolled across the darkening sky. Victoria looked up, despair washing over her as fat raindrops began to fall. The wind picked up, plastering her calico dress against her slender frame as she desperately sought shelter. 50 yards away stood a ramshackle barn, its weathered boards offering the only protection visible for miles. Gathering her skirts, Victoria ran toward it, the rain now falling in earnest, soaking her to the skin before she reached the sagging door. She wrestled with the heavy wooden panel, finally managing to push it open enough to slip inside. The interior was dim and musty, the air thick with the scent of hay and horses. Victoria's eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, and she gasped when she realized she wasn't alone. A tall figure rose from where he'd been mending a saddle in the corner. "Who's there?" a deep voice demanded. Victoria pressed herself against the door, fear momentarily overtaking her desperation. "I'm sorry to intrude. The storm. I just needed shelter until it passes." The man struck a match, lighting a lantern that cast a warm glow throughout the space. Victoria could now see him clearly, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with a day's growth of beard shadowing a sun-weathered face. Eyes the color of worn denim regarded her with cautious interest. "You're soaked through," he observed, hanging the lantern on a hook. "Not the best night to be wandering about." "I wasn't wandering," Victoria replied defensively. "The stage had already gone and I had nowhere else to wait." The man nodded, seeming to take her measure. "Daniel Zachary," he said finally. "This is my place, well, the barn anyway." "House is just over the rise," he gestured vaguely. "And you are Victoria Davidson." She hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal to a stranger. "I'm traveling to Colorado." A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the barn doors and Victoria shivered in her wet clothes. Daniel frowned. "That storm's not letting up any time soon, Miss Davidson. You'll catch your death in those wet things." He reached for a wool blanket draped over a stall door. "Here, you can wrap up in this while I fix us some coffee over at the house." Victoria hesitated. Propriety dictated she shouldn't accept such an invitation from a man she'd just met, but what choice did she have? The alternative was a night spent shivering in a barn. "I'm not going to hurt you," Daniel said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Been ranching these parts for 5 years now. Ask anyone in town about Daniel Zachary, and they'll tell you I'm honorable if nothing else." Something in his straightforward manner reassured her. Victoria accepted the blanket with a nod. "Thank you, Mr. Zachary. Call me Daniel. Mr. Zachary was my father, God rest him." He grabbed his hat from a peg. "Come on then, we'll make a run for it." The house was a modest 2-room cabin with a lean-to kitchen attached to the back. Simple but tidy, with a braided rug before the stone fireplace and curtains at the window's touches that spoke of a woman's hand, though Victoria saw no evidence of a female presence. Daniel busied himself stoking the banked fire while Victoria stood dripping on the threshold, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "The bedroom's through there," Daniel nodded toward a closed door. "You'll find a trunk with some clothes. They might be a bit large, but they're dry." "Go on and change while I get that coffee going," Victoria hesitated. "Whose clothes?" A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "My sister's. She stayed with me for a spell last year." He turned toward the kitchen, effectively ending the conversation. In the small bedroom, Victoria found the trunk at the foot of a neatly made bed. She opened it to find several simple dresses and undergarments. Choosing the plainest dress, she quickly changed, grateful to be out of her wet clothes. The dress hung loosely on her frame, but it was clean and dry. When she emerged, Daniel had coffee brewing and had set out bread and cold venison on the small table. "Not much of a supper," he apologized, "but it'll fill the hollow." Victoria sat across from him, acutely aware of the impropriety of the situation. "You're very kind, Mr. Zachary Daniel, to help a stranger this way." He shrugged, pouring coffee into a chipped enamel mug. "No one's a stranger for long out here, too few of us to stand on ceremony." He pushed the mug toward her. "So, Colorado," Victoria wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I have a cousin there, she might have worked for me." "Might, we haven't been in touch for some years." Victoria stared into her coffee. "But circumstances have changed and I find myself in need of a new situation." Daniel didn't press, but his eyes were perceptive. "Hard times come to everyone sooner or later," he said simply. They ate in companionable silence, the storm raging outside. Victoria found herself studying her host surreptitiously. He was handsome in a rugged way, perhaps 30 years old, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and wind. His hands were calloused but clean, his movements economical and confident. "Where will you sleep?" Victoria asked suddenly, realizing she'd taken his bed. "Got a perfectly good bedroll by the fire," Daniel replied. "Spent plenty of nights under the stars on cattle drives. This is luxury by comparison." After supper, he insisted on washing the few dishes while Victoria sat by the fire, combing through her damp hair with her fingers. Despite her predicament, she felt oddly at peace in this stranger's home. "Tomorrow's stage doesn't come through until afternoon," Daniel said, hanging the dish towel to dry. "You're welcome to stay until then." "Thank you," Victoria said softly. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Daniel settled into a chair across from her, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Might not be my place to ask, but what's really taking you to Colorado, young woman like you traveling alone? It's unusual." Victoria stared into the flames, debating how much to reveal. Something about Daniel's steady presence made her want to unburden herself. "I was married," she began haltingly. "For 3 years to a wheat farmer named Malcolm Spencer. Yesterday, he brought me back to my parents' home and informed them I was barren. That he was dissolving our marriage because I couldn't give him sons." Her voice caught. "My family has little enough as it is. They couldn't keep me." Daniel's expression darkened. "This Spencer, he's certain the problem lies with you," Victoria flushed. "He had a wife before me who bore him a child, though both mother and infant died in childbirth. So yes, he's certain." She twisted her hands in her lap. 3 years of trying, of hoping each month, and nothing. I tried everything, teas, tonics, prayers. Nothing worked." "Some men are too quick to place blame," Daniel said quietly, "and too slow to count their blessings." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the rain drumming on the roof. "Get some rest," Daniel finally said, rising to his feet. "Morning comes early out here." Victoria retreated to the bedroom, lying awake for a long time despite her exhaustion. She thought of Daniel Zachary's kindness to a stranger, of the empty years of her marriage, of the uncertain future stretching before her. Eventually, lulled by the rain and the unfamiliar comfort of feeling safe, she drifted into sleep. Morning brought clear skies and birdsong. Victoria woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in her own clothes, now dry after hanging near the fireplace overnight, and stepped into the main room to find Daniel setting the table. "Hope you're hungry," he said by way of greeting. "Got eggs from the henhouse and fresh biscuits." Victoria's eyes widened at the spread. "You bake, man's got to eat," Daniel replied with a half-smile. "Learned from my mother before she passed, said no son of hers would live on hardtack and jerky." They ate breakfast together, and Victoria found herself relaxing in Daniel's company. He told her about his small ranch, 20 acres of decent grazing land, a modest herd of cattle, 2 good horses, and plans to expand when he could afford it. "It's not much," he admitted, "but it's mine, free and clear, no debts hanging over my head." "It's more than many have," Victoria observed. "You've built something to be proud of." After breakfast, Daniel offered to show her around the property. The day was washing bright, the storm having scrubbed the air clean. Victoria walked beside him as he pointed out the corrals, the small vegetable garden, the spring-fed creek that never ran dry even in the hottest summers. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "Peaceful. Gets lonesome sometimes," Daniel admitted. "But I've got good neighbors a few miles down the road. We look out for each other." As they walked back toward the house, Victoria noticed Daniel watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "Been thinking about your situation." "Seems to me Colorado's an awful long way to go on a maybe," Victoria sighed. "I don't have many options, I'm afraid." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "What if you did have another option?" "What do you mean?" "I need help around here," he said matter-of-factly. "Place this size, it's hard for one man to manage everything. Garden needs tending, animals need feeding, house needs keeping. I can pay fair wages, not much, but enough to put something by." Victoria stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer. "You'd hire me. You don't even know me." "I'm a fair judge of character," Daniel replied. "You're clearly not afraid of hard work and you're in a tight spot. I've been there myself. Sometimes all a person needs is a chance." Victoria's mind raced. The idea was tempting, far more so than traveling to Colorado on the slim hope that a distant cousin might take her in. But to live alone with a single man, even as his employee. "It wouldn't be proper," she said reluctantly. "People would talk." "People always talk," Daniel said with a shrug. "But if it concerns you, Mrs. Hollister down the road could use help with her washing once a week. You could stay with her those nights, keep appearances respectable." Victoria hesitated, weighing her limited options. The stage would arrive in a few hours, carrying her away from this unexpected haven. But to what? Uncertainty at best, destitution at worst. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked finally. Daniel's gaze was steady. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it. And because I think we might help each other." In that moment, looking into his honest blue eyes, Victoria made her decision. "I'll stay," she said softly. "Thank you." And so Victoria Davidson became Daniel Zachary's housekeeper, a title that raised eyebrows in Cottonwood Springs, but one that both parties maintained with strict propriety. She moved into the bedroom, while Daniel continued to sleep in the main room. Each Monday, Victoria would go to Mrs. Hollister's farm 3 miles down the road, help with the weekly washing, and stay overnight before returning the next day. The arrangement worked well. Victoria found satisfaction in bringing order to Daniel's home, cleaning, cooking, mending, planting a larger vegetable garden. Daniel, for his part, seemed to appreciate coming home to hot meals and clean clothes. Their evenings were spent in companionable conversation by the fire, Daniel telling stories of cattle drives and frontier life, Victoria occasionally sharing memories of her childhood in Missouri before her family moved west. They never spoke of her failed marriage or the painful circumstances that had brought her to his door. Daniel seemed to understand instinctively that those wounds were still too fresh. As spring warmed into summer, Victoria began to notice subtle changes in their interaction. Daniel's gaze would linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Their hands would brush when passing dishes at the table, sending unexpected sparks through her. She found herself paying more attention to her appearance, pinching color into her cheeks before he came in from the fields. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch after supper, watching fireflies rise from the tall grass. "You've brought life back to this place," Daniel said quietly. "I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." Victoria felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer night. "I've been happy here," she admitted. "Happier than I expected to be again." Daniel turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Victoria," the moment was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Daniel stood, hand moving instinctively to the gun belt hanging by the door. A rider appeared in the twilight, Sheriff Morgan from town, his expression grim. "Evening, Dan," he called, dismounting. "Madam," he added, nodding to Victoria. "What brings you out this way, Sheriff?" Daniel asked, the easy warmth of moments ago replaced by wariness. "Looking for hands to form a posse," Morgan replied. "Stafford gang hit the bank in Preston yesterday, killed 2 men. They were spotted heading this direction." Victoria felt a chill despite the warm evening. The Stafford gang was notorious throughout the territory. 3 brothers and their cohorts who had been terrorizing towns for the past year. Daniel frowned. "When do you ride out?" "First light tomorrow. Meeting at the crossroads." Daniel nodded. "I'll be there." After the sheriff rode away, Victoria turned to Daniel, unable to hide her concern. "It's dangerous. The Staffords are killers." "All the more reason they need to be stopped," Daniel replied, his jaw set in a determined line. Victoria spent a restless night, worry gnawing at her. By the time Daniel rose before dawn, she had coffee and breakfast waiting. "I'll be back in a few days," he said, buckling on his gun belt. "Keep the doors locked. Use the shotgun if you need to. You remember how I showed you?" Victoria nodded, fighting back tears. "Be careful." Daniel paused at the door, then turned back and crossed to where she stood. Before she could react, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her a brief, fierce press of lips that left her breathless. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he murmured. "Gives me one more reason to come back safe." Then he was gone, leaving Victoria touching her lips in wonderment. 3 days passed with no word. Victoria kept busy, trying not to imagine Daniel lying wounded or worse somewhere on the prairie. On the 4th morning, she was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. Her heart leapt, then plummeted when she saw it was Sheriff Morgan and another man supporting a 3rd figure slumped between them. Even from a distance, she recognized Daniel's broad shoulders. "He's been shot," Morgan called as Victoria ran toward them. "Doc patched him up, but he lost a lot of blood." They carried Daniel into the house, laying him on his bed. His face was ashen, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his left thigh. Victoria barely heard the sheriff's explanation. "Ambush, firefight, 2 of the Staffords dead, the 3rd brother wounded but escaped." "He was lucky," Morgan concluded. "Bullet went clean through, missed the bone. Doc says he needs rest and to keep the wound clean." After they left, Victoria sat beside Daniel's bed, gently bathing his face with cool water. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her with effort. "You're here," he whispered. "Of course I'm here," she replied, fighting tears. "Where else would I be?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Thought I might have dreamed you." "No dream," Victoria said softly. "Now rest. You need to heal." The next 2 weeks were a blur of worry and work as Victoria nursed Daniel back to health. The wound developed an infection that brought fever and delirium. For 3 terrifying days, she barely left his side, bathing him with cool cloths, spooning broth between his cracked lips, praying as she hadn't prayed in years. When the fever finally broke, leaving Daniel weak but lucid, Victoria wept with relief. Recovery was slow. Daniel chafed at the confinement, unused to idleness. Victoria read to him from his small collection of books, played checkers with him using a board he carved years ago, and listened to his stories of growing up in Tennessee before the war took his father and 2 brothers. "Is that why you came west?" she asked one evening as she changed his bandage. Daniel nodded. "Too many ghosts back there, needed a fresh start." Like me, Victoria said softly. Their eyes met and held. Victoria, Daniel began hesitantly, when I was fevered I thought I heard you say things. About feelings. Victoria flushed. The fever made you imagine things. Did it? His hand caught hers. Because I've been imagining telling you how I feel for months now. Victoria's heart thundered in her chest. Daniel, let me say it, he interrupted. I know it hasn't been that long and your past is still raw, but I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your kindness even after everything you've been through. I find myself thinking about you all the time, wanting to build something with you if you'd be willing. Victoria stared at their joined hands. I'm barren, she whispered. You know that, I can't give you children. Did it ever occur to you that Spencer might have been wrong? Daniel asked gently. That the problem might have been with him, not you? Victoria looked up, startled. The possibility had never crossed her mind. But even if that's true, Daniel continued, it doesn't matter to me. Some men measure worth by sons, but I measure it by character, by heart, and yours is the truest I've ever known. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. I've been afraid to admit how I feel, she confessed, afraid to hope for happiness again. Daniel's thumb traced patterns on her palm. I'm not asking for an answer today, just think about it, about us. As August ripened into September, Daniel regained his strength. He began moving around the house with the aid of a crudely fashioned crutch, then progressed to short walks outside. Victoria continued to cook and clean, but the nature of their relationship had subtly shifted. Their conversations grew deeper, more intimate. Sometimes their hands would meet and linger. Once, while helping him exercise his injured leg, Victoria found herself pulled into a kiss that left them both trembling. By October, Daniel was well enough to resume most of his duties, though he still favored his injured leg. The first frost had come and gone, and the cottonwoods along the creek blazed gold against the azure sky. One crisp afternoon, Daniel suggested they ride out to check the northern fence line. Victoria, who had learned to ride one of Daniel's gentle mares during his convalescence, readily agreed. They packed a simple lunch and set out across the rolling prairie, the horse's breath pluming in the cool air. They stopped at a bluff overlooking the valley, spreading a blanket on the sun-warmed grass for their meal. As they ate, Daniel grew uncharacteristically quiet. Is your leg paining you? Victoria asked, concerned. No, it's not that. Daniel reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that glinted in the sunlight. I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He opened his hand to reveal a simple gold band. It was my mother's, he explained. Not fancy but solid, like what I'm offering you. Victoria's breath caught as Daniel took her hand. I love you, Victoria, he said simply. I want to build a life with you, no pretense of housekeeper and employer, but as husband and wife, if you'll have me. Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks as joy, pure and unexpected, welled within her. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll have you. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss a promise of the future they would forge together. They were married in November 1876, a small ceremony in the Cottonwood Springs Church with Mrs. Hollister and Sheriff Morgan as witnesses. Victoria wore a new blue dress that Daniel had ordered from the mercantile, and Daniel wore his only suit, freshly pressed. Life settled into a rhythm of shared work and shared joy. Their small ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Daniel added a room to the cabin, and Victoria planted rose bushes along the front path. They attended barn dances and church socials, no longer the subject of gossip but accepted as a proper married couple. In the privacy of their home, they discovered each other with tender passion. Victoria, whose marriage to Malcolm had been a cold, dutiful affair, blossomed under Daniel's loving attention. For the first time, she understood that physical love could be a joy rather than an obligation. As winter gave way to spring, Victoria began to experience familiar monthly discomforts. But when March came and went without her usual courses, she hardly dared to hope. By April, when her dresses grew snug around the waist, she could no longer deny the possibility. She told Daniel on a mild evening as they sat on the porch swing he had built for her birthday. His face transformed with wonder as he placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Victoria covered his hand with hers. "I was so certain I couldn't, that I was." "I told you Spencer was a fool," Daniel said, pulling her close, "in more ways than one." The pregnancy progressed without complications. Victoria bloomed with new life, her skin glowing, her steps light despite her growing belly. Daniel doted on her, insisting she rest when she tried to do too much, bringing her wildflowers from the prairie, crafting a cradle from oak salvaged from an old barn. On a blustery December night in 1877, Victoria gave birth to a healthy baby girl with her father's blue eyes and a dusting of dark hair. They named her Rose Emma for Daniel's mother, Rose for the flowers Victoria had planted to make their house a home. As Victoria nursed her daughter in the pre-dawn quiet, Daniel sat beside them, his face soft with wonder. "I never thought I'd have this," Victoria confessed, stroking Emma's downy head. "A husband who loves me, a child of my own, a place where I truly belong." Daniel leaned down to kiss first his daughter's forehead, then his wife's lips. "You belong here," he said simply. "You always will." Spring came again, bringing with it Emma's first smiles and the promise of new beginnings. On a warm May afternoon, 5 years to the day since Victoria had first sought shelter in Daniel's barn, they sat together in the shade of the cottonwood tree behind their home, watching Emma toddle after butterflies in the grass. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Victoria asked, leaning against Daniel's shoulder. "If the stage hadn't left already that day, if the storm hadn't come," Daniel's arm tightened around her. "I think some things are meant to be," he said. "Some people are meant to find each other, no matter what." Victoria smiled, watching their daughter laugh in the sunshine, living proof that sometimes life's greatest blessings arise from its deepest sorrows. What had once seemed like an ending had become a beginning, a chance for love to take root and grow on the wild Wyoming prairie. "Some people are meant to find each other," she echoed softly, turning her face up to his for a kiss. "And I'm so glad I found you."